Okay, wow. What an incredible story to follow, and I knew that I just had to hear what Joachim had to say, so the only thing I was thinking of coming up here was, one, please don't fall down as I step up the stage, and two, Ashley, you said we couldn't bring a script. You lied to me. So I'm going to do my very best to keep up, but the cliffhangers may be a little bit off timed because I won't be able to remember where I wrote everything down. But as Ashley said, I'm here to talk about something a little bit different, and how instead with masculinity, it's not how I've personally learned how to handle mine, but how I learned that I don't choose how to present myself and present how I'm a man, or choose how I present what's strong and manly about me. Instead, it comes from the actions and the ideals and the things that I hold dear to me and the things that I hold dear when it comes to the people that I'm involved with. So for me, my story starts, my personal Troy Bolton experience story starts in elementary school. Now, before I begin, Troy Bolton, if any of you don't know, is a character in a high school musical, a Disney performance, a movie, where he has to decide, his heroic struggle is, do I play basketball or do I take part in this new and exciting activity, which is singing and being part of a musical? And even in this movie, they make it like it's black and white, like you're one or the other. You can't be both. There's songs sung about it, it's all bright and cheery, but there's still that inner feeling that you can't be in these two different worlds. You can't be someone who appreciates the arts, music, theater, poetry, and also someone who likes to put their head in concussions on the line every Friday night. Now, that started to say a tone to me, and if what I'm saying sounds like complete malarkey, I'm sure we're all still on our free week of Disney Plus, and you can watch it for yourself. So just make sure to check that up and add it to your listening. But I digress. My story starts in elementary school in the 5th or 6th grade, where I had this wonderful elementary teacher. She came in for music education, and that's all she did. Her name was Jane, and she came with 40 ukuleles. Now, I'm sure many of us are used to those recorders that we used to have to play, and my father, both of my fathers who are here tonight, they're both musicians, and I'm sure if I ever had to play a recorder in their presence, it'd be broken in half immediately, because it's not a true art form. But in all seriousness, that was how I was introduced to music in a more serious sense, along with the piano playing that I've been doing and other vocations. I love to sing. But the other thing that this wonderful educator, this wonderful woman brought, is she was determined to have musicals in elementary school. Now, Joachim, I'm sure you can appreciate the fact that having a whole bunch of incredibly young people try and learn Oklahoma is a terrifying, terrifying vision, and I just, even to this day, after trying to take part at my own age, I can't believe how she was able to do this year in and year out. I loved being part of the musicals. It was just something you did. You didn't understand that there was perhaps this black and white. You couldn't be a person in musicals and do arts and do performance and rugby and things like that. I didn't understand that yet. Everyone was just part of the musical. And every year I'd audition, and I'd forget my lines, and I would sing off key, and I would stand in the wrong place, or even miss an entrance once or twice. Even to the point that in our 8th grade production, I'd finally gotten a role with more than 2 lines, and it was so exciting. It was in Oklahoma, and we were standing, and the entire audience, the audience was quiet. The antagonist had passed away, and I had to say, "He's dead." That was it. That was the whole line. I had to say, "He's dead," and I forgot. I was so moved by my friend Devin's performance of this character as an 8th grade student. It was just beautiful. It was heartwarming. And so I got smacked in the stomach by my friend Andrew, and he said, "You got a line here." And it was videotaped, so everyone has for posterity that vision of me getting smacked in the stomach and going, oh, he's dead! And that was it. That was the first moment I got a laugh. I shouldn't have gotten one. But it's like a drug for anyone who's been on the stage before. You just want to hear it again and again and again. And that's where my true love of this theater really took off. I knew I wanted to be part of something bigger and part of something where I could do theater more often than once in my school musical. When I went to Campbell Collegiate afterwards, for my first 2 years of high school, they didn't do musicals, but there was this wonderful company called Do It With Class. and they did musicals all the time. But the understanding that I'd had, and from what my friends had told me, do with classes for the really talented kids. They're smart, they're funny, they've got beautiful singing voices, they learn their lines and they don't forget them. And Nate, you're not that kind of guy. Now, a driving thing for me has been, and something that I used to think was part of my masculinity and how to show that I was a man, is if someone told me I couldn't do it, you bet I was going to try. If someone said, Nate, you're not good enough for that, I'd say, oh yeah, and that's gotten me into some really weird situations. But for this situation, it came down to me auditioning for Do With Class, and I sat down and I had my father help me prepare an audition, and I went in and I sang my heart out, and I was cast in the company. And those years of my life were magical to me. I spent my entire high school career believing that I was destined to be a professional theater performer. Something that to this day, I know friends who have gone on to do that for a living, and they're incredible. They're full of life and energy, and they bring these feelings of emotion and happiness and sadness all to audiences across the world. And it's a beautiful thing that I wish that I could have taken part of in a more professional role. But as I did this, I started to figure something out. I was a musical theater kid now. When people looked at me in the hallway, they had an assumption about me based on what I was into, what I liked, the people I hung out with. I was a musical theater kid. And at the time, and partially from my understanding, that made me effeminate, weak, someone to be looked down upon by the people who played sports or had other interests. And I hated that. Because when you're in a theater performance, there's a part you get to play. And for those of you who don't know, theater is predominantly, and luckily it's changing, in these smaller city centers is a lot of women and a lot of gay men. So for me, being a straight man in musical theater, I felt quite masculine. I felt like I had something to offer that wasn't there. I was the manly guy in the musicals. But that was very different to the way that people had seen me walking down the hallway. And that became something that I started to allow myself and identify myself as. But I tried to put a little twist on it. I'd heard the phrase metrosexual. I still don't know what that means, but I identified as it because I thought this is much better than being called feminine. And now, of course, I know it's not the case. You're whatever you want to be, and you represent yourself how you so choose. After 2 years, there was an unfortunate case that my mother moved away, and my brother moved with her, and and I chose to stay in town because I was going to be a professional artist and a professional performer, and Do With Class was the way to do it. It's an incredible company. I'm not saying that it wasn't. And I moved to my dad's place up in the north end, and I had the option to move schools. And this was such an amazing moment for me because not only did I get to finally take part in a high school performance, a high school musical theater show, but I actually met one of the very few people in my life that have stuck with me all the way until now, that have helped show me that masculinity or being that person that those ideals that you always hear about, and also those failures that you hear about, it's not something you're locked into, and it's not something you have to show. So I'll tell you a little story about how I met this young man. I was brand new to Winston Collegiate, and I'm getting caught on my cord because I don't know how to use a mic. And I was terrified because I was coming into a new school, and I'd been through Campbell for 2 years, and high school's scary. And I was walking in the front doors, and there was musical theater class at 7:30 in the morning, which is an ungodly hour even at this day. And I knew no one. I didn't know anyone. And if you know Winston Collegiate, the office is all these windows, and you can see absolutely everyone who comes in through the doors. And I walked in the front doors of Winston Collegiate, absolutely terrified. And like a blur of light, Bart Soroka flew at me so fast I didn't know what was happening. He came right up to me, he grabbed me by the hand, and he shook my entire body, and he said, "Hi, you must be Nathan Sgrazzutti." Now, I know that because I've been sent out here to say hi to you by Janine Clark, our teacher, and the reason I'm here is because I know that you're brand new and you're not going to know anyone, and I'm supposed to be your friend, and you know what? We're going to be the best of friends. Thank God he was right. And this young man was someone who was so proud and so unequivocally themselves that became a way that I could experience my journey moving forwards and understanding how I could be myself and not just what I thought other people saw. Fast forward, I do the musicals, I do the Do With class, I do that thing. It's something I'm very excited in. And a moment happens to me where I discover my second love that you've already been told about. It's been spoiled. Thanks. I met a girl. I'd met girls before. I could even talk to them on the odd occasion. But I met a girl. It was at the end of my grade 12 education. And I really liked this girl. But this girl really liked football players. I was not a football player. I'd never played football. I'd never thought about it. That's when musicals happened. So I did the musicals. And I thought, oh gosh, how am I going to fix this? Because this is basically saying, no, you're not my type because you don't do the thing I like. And I liked her, so I wanted to do the thing that she liked. So all of a sudden, as I've now understood in all of my involvement in rugby, is someone approached me in the hallway and they said, "Hey, you should come join this sport." And I thought, first, do you know that I have no place on a field of any sort at this point in my life? I shouldn't be anywhere near it, and I'll probably injure myself just getting ready. But the lovely and amazing thing about rugby is football, there's tryouts, and you have to fight for your position. In rugby, if you have a pulse, you can play. And I had a pulse. And I joined rugby. And from the very first moment I walked onto that football field, turned rugby pitch, I discovered that there's a whole other world that I had completely shut my mind off to, that I'd always assumed was the other. Going back to that Troy Bolton understanding, I'd always assumed the athletes are the athletes and the theater people are the theater people. And they stay separate and they cannot come together. But these people that I was spending time with now, they were just like everyone else. They looked at me as someone who was there to play a sport with them, a violent collision sport where you didn't get a helmet. And they treated me as one of their own quite quickly. And that was amazing. Fast forward, I didn't get the girl, but I did get the sport. The sport stuck. And honestly, I couldn't be more thankful for that, because I now had an opportunity to understand what masculinity was to an entirely different group of people. And so quickly, I started to learn, as I moved through the end of my high school career and into my university career, that I was playing two different roles and two different sides of the same coin. On the rugby pitch, I was trying to be hard and angry and fierce, fast, physical. And on the stage, I was trying to be intimate and warm and inviting and artistic. But I hadn't yet accepted that those could all be the same Nathan. I was presenting myself. I was playing two different roles, no matter where I ended up. And that started to create a dissonance that I didn't quite understand yet. But it was affecting me in a really negative way. It was starting to pull me apart at the seams. Because I loved both of the things that I was doing, the theater and the rugby, but I didn't know quite yet how I was going to make these things mesh. Fast forward to university, and I joined the theater program at the University of Regina, which was a spectacular opportunity, and I was still in the belief that I could become a performer and do that for a living. And in my second year, I was cast as the lead in As You Like It. So this is where a script could have helped. It was either As You Like It or Much Ado About Nothing, Shakespearean comedies. And I had an opportunity at the same time, 4 weeks prior, to play in a rugby tournament in Las Vegas. That's right. I was 18, but I knew I could find a fake somehow. Now, this was an incredible opportunity, not only because I got to play rugby representing my province, but also I'd been able to talk them into bringing my little brother to this tournament. And if you remember correctly, there was a test. There's a test on this later. He had moved away. So I hadn't had the opportunity to play this sport that my little brother was also very good at. He's basically like me, except taller, faster, better looking, and smarter. Of course. But I was so excited to get to play a sport with him. And this was a moment that I knew that I just couldn't give up. So I went and I walked up to my director after rehearsal and I said, "Hi, can I talk to you for a second? There's been an opportunity offered to me. I have an opportunity to go and play rugby in Vegas. It's going to be 3 days away. Not a big deal. I'll come back. It'll be great." And this director said no. He said, "You can't do that. You're set up and you're doing this show. And rugby and theater just don't mix. You can't put your body on the line like that before a show," which makes sense, but it was 4 weeks away. I'd jumped back from injuries. Enough. And I was so confused by that. So I went over and I thought, well, maybe it's just because of the schedule. Maybe it's because I'm missing the Friday rehearsal. So I went back and I asked the gentlemen who were running the rugby team, I said, "Could I come a day later? Would that be okay?" "Sure, great, yeah, why not? We'll get you in the day later." And I go back and I think, well, I've come up with a solution. It's going to be fine. And once again, I get a no. This director had, in many ways, confirmed what I had always been worried about, that the two things that I had grown to love and adore so much and identify myself as, just because it couldn't mix. I'd seen High School Musical by the time, so I knew it was possible. But it wasn't working for me. So I thought he was bluffing. So I ended up sitting down in an office with my entire hopes and dreams of a career in musical theater, performing for a living, entertaining hundreds, and hopefully getting a laugh, and the opportunity to spend one weekend with my little brother playing the sport that we both loved that we'd never had the opportunity to before. I thought, there's no way someone else can't understand that. But I sat down with the department head of the theater department and with this director. The situation was explained so that we were all on the same page. The director turned to me and he said, "What's your decision?" And I said, "I'm going to go play rugby." And he said, "Then you're out of the show." I'd never quit a show before. I'd never been removed. To me, it was like rock bottom. It was my first opportunity to do a really big university show, and because of the fact that I wanted to spend a weekend with my brother, I was going to lose that, and I'd said the wrong thing, I'd made the wrong play, I'd made the wrong decision, and now that was all down the drain. Something that I thought was so trivial became a life or death decision for an entire career that I thought I'd have for 6 years. And once again, I felt that slow separation between these two people that I was being forced apart now, as if someone had stuck some sort of plier in between these two loves of my life, these two parts of my being, and just shoved and ripped them apart, and it said, you are one or the other. You can't be both. So I bought into that. I said, okay, you get to decide, this is how it is, and that's how things are. When I returned, I left the theater department. I was not welcome there because the way the story had been shared and the way that it was understood, I'd let them down, and in many ways I had. I hadn't been able to play the big basketball game and do this and sing with Gabriella. I played the basketball game and forgot to show up. And for a couple of years, that was the decision that I lived with. I threw myself fully into rugby. I got overly committed in a lot of ways. I did a whole bunch of other things that were just trying out new hobbies. I was so used to being so overcommitted, I just kind of needed to fill the space because I wasn't doing theater anymore. Oh no. So I went away. I spent some time in Calgary. This seems to be a theme. Leave for a bit. You'll do better. You'll be fine. So I spent time in Calgary. I spent a year in Calgary where I played some higher level rugby. I played premiership for the Calgary Saints. It wasn't the team I was supposed to play for. I went out there and I had a connection. I was supposed to show up at a specific time at a specific gym and shake a specific person's hand. And I managed to muddle that all up. But rugby being as it is, and me being someone with a pulse, I shook a gentleman named Vinny's hand, and he said, "Welcome to the Saints." And I said, "Oh no, that's not the Hornets." But they had a really cool symbol. The Calgary Saints are a stick figure with a halo with a rugby ball. I thought that was so cool, so I had to do it. So I played a full season with them, and for the first time, we actually went all the way to the provincial playoff, where I haven't told one of my dads about this yet, where my shoulder came right out. Sorry, it's back in now. But that was kind of the end of my premiership of high-level rugby sports. I didn't know they were coming tonight, but I had to include it in the story. And I ended up returning to Regina. And I got a phone call from a woman I'd worked with in Duluth class, because she'd heard I was back in town, and she'd assumed wrongly that I was in really great shape because I was playing really good rugby. And she said, "Hey, we've got someone that we didn't really audition for a show, the Full Monty." Okay, I'm getting a couple laughs. All right. So for those of you that didn't laugh, you should, because it's basically about 5 old guys in Britain who have a strip show where they go the full Monty, which I'm told means completely naked. It's not a slang term we use anymore, but yeah. So the opening of the show, the curtain comes up, and the first character on stage is a very flamboyant male stripper. And that was the role that they needed me to fill. Hadn't been on stage in a while, and I was promised, you know what, there's no lines, there's no nothing, show up, we've got a Speedo for you, slap it on, dance around, do a little thing, off you go. Don't even have to come back for bows. That was a lie. There were scenes, and I was forced to do theater again, and I was so happy. Oh my God, I'm back. It wasn't a huge role. It's not what I auditioned for now, but just kidding. I'm just happy to be on stage. But it was something. It was something. It reignited that second part that I'd seen pulled so far away from me for so long. It drew it back to me. And once again, it wasn't me making that decision for myself. Once again, it wasn't me taking control of the way that I represented myself and how I decided that I was Nathan. It was someone else actually did that for me. I was still letting other people choose what I got to do and who I got to represent as and what kind of person I got to be. But I couldn't be more thankful. And I dove straight back into theater. I think I did 3-4 shows that year because I just couldn't get enough. I'd been bottling that part of me up inside and kind of keeping it there by listening to musical theater in the car on the way to and from different games, surprising a lot of my teammates as they listened to Hamilton on full blast on the way up to Saskatoon. To which they still do, and some have actually started to refuse to listen to, and we won't take my car then. So I was able to bring back both of these loves of my life, and that was really when I started to understand, and I started to really get that feeling that even from a young age, I'd let other people tell me kind of who I was going to be based on my interests. You like theater. This is the kind of guy you are. Metrosexual. I don't get what that means. Or you're a rugby player. You're a big dumb idiot who's probably concussed right now. I'm not an idiot. I might be concussed. And I started to really understand that it doesn't really come down to who I let other people choose who I was, because I could choose to do whatever I want. I can be in the big show. I can make the basketball game. And so I started to really buy into that and live into that. From rock bottom, where I thought that I had to give up an entire half of myself, I was now whole again. The things that I got out of theater were things that I could never get out of rugby. The things I got out of rugby, I could never get out of theater. In theater, you're cast, and for 2 months, you perform as the person you are cast as, and that is who you are. In rugby, if you don't get the start on 1 week, well, make sure you hit that guy really hard in practice, and maybe you'll get it the next. And in so many different ways, it's like fire and ice. The passion and the fierce feelings of emotion and anger and rage and excitement and joy that I feel on a rugby pitch. Well, I got those exact same feelings, but in a completely different way on a stage. And I had given up 6-8 years of my life of one because someone said I couldn't do both together. I'm happy to say that while that was where the story was supposed to stop when I originally contacted Ashley, something really cool happened. University of Regina recently closed its very first musical in 32 years. They did Spring Awakening, which, for any of you who don't know, it's a story based on an old German play from 1890s that won a whole swack of Tony Awards in 2007. Not really My Fair Lady or Oklahoma or The Music Man. It's quite dark, depressing, and deals with a lot of really human social issues. Homosexuality, suicide, sex. Thank God they didn't have enough singers in the theater department because I got a chance to take part. It was great. And I was cast as Ernst, who's a tertiary character, which is fine. I was just really happy to be part of it. And I spent a lot of time performing this role and getting to know this role until 5 days before the performance. There was an unfortunate event that meant that the lead performer of the show wasn't going to be able to take part. And as anyone knows, there's two major things that people think about in theater. One, it takes a really long time to learn a role, and two, the show must go on. So, as the entire cast was sat down in the theater department 5 days before we were set to open for our first preview, we said, do we have a show? Do we have a plan? Can we go forward? Theater department had put tens of thousands of dollars into this. People had grades on the line. And obviously, if the musical doesn't work out, they're not going to do one for another 32 years. So we better figure this out. So I put up my hand and I said, you know what, I think I can pull this off. This is my chance. This is my Troy Bolton moment. I hated myself immediately after doing this. Because that is a for anyone who's done this sort of thing, it's a nightmare to learn a role in 2 months, much less 5 days. But something else had happened. For the first time ever, the University of Regina Cougars men's 15s club was going to playoffs. And you better believe in that 5 days, that was our semifinal. Oh boy. I was so fortunate. I was able to lead these young men. I am no longer young comparatively on a university rugby team as their captain. And because of what had just come out of my mouth in a theater, in a spurt of momentary, well, I don't know what you'd call it, but I thought I could pull it off. I forgot entirely that I had to be in a car to Calgary to play in a blizzard 2 days later, and then come back and do this. And at that moment, I knew I had to have the same discussion with a different director that had ripped me and my being and who I thought I was completely in half. I was terrified. So I waited till the talk was done, got the pats on the back, smiled awkwardly, and tried to pull him away later. And I said, listen, I've just made a commitment, and I don't know if you're going to let me do it. And he asked me, well, what's the problem? And I said, I've played an entire season with these boys, and I'm not gonna forget them, and I know that I've done this before, but I need to go to Calgary for this weekend. I need to drive up there. I need to play. But something completely different happened, because the Nathan that had handled his first problem thinking everything's fine and there might be an issue though because these are two completely different things, black and white, I hadn't presented it like that the same way. I'd spoken to this director from my heart, and I said, these two things mean the world to me. And because of that, I'm willing to put my entire heart and soul into it, and I know that I can pull it off if you'll trust me to pull it off. And he did. He said, yep, you can go, you can play, do not get hurt. And then you can come back and you can do this show, and we're going to see what happens. They didn't cross any T's. They didn't do any official announcement that the show was still on. They just said, we're going to see how it goes. So I drove up, and a poor young man sat in the side passenger seat with me for 8 hours in a car ride, having to read through a sex scene with me 13 times because I needed to make sure that I got the "Oh Wendlas" right at the right time. We have a very intimate relationship now. And then I got out of a car, slept about 6 hours, threw on the shortest short shorts I could find, played 80 minutes in a blizzard in a position I'd never played before. At one point being tackled, and a guy had intentionally tried to hurt me, so I turned to him and I said, "Hey man, don't do that, I've got a show to do next week." To which he replied, "Well, I didn't hit you in the neck." And I said, "I still gotta dance." The look on his face, oh God, it was just gorgeous. It'll be burned into my mind forever. On the way home, 8 hours, once again, nobody in the passenger seat, so I sang. I sang along to that entire soundtrack. It was a little bit high for me, and for anyone who's seen me do performances, I like to pretend I'm a tenor. I'm not. So I sang and sang and sang. I sang in a cappella. I sang along with the soundtrack. Jonathan Groff is a hero and a god and should be worshipped, but I don't have his voice, so I just figured out ways to cheat. And I came up with a way to pull it off. I came up with a way that I could come home. I could be Nathan, the rugby player, big macho athlete. And I found a way that I could be Nathan, the heartfelt and warm musical theater lover. And I guess that redemption opportunity for me I never thought would come. But it really solidified for me the fact that love what you're going to love, do what you're going to do, be entertained by what entertains you. If you want to stand on a stage and tell other people about your life, do it. Seriously, I think they take volunteers for this every time. But always know that whatever kind of amalgamation that creates in your being, that's the person that you're presenting. You don't need to be one or the other. You don't need to be the rugby athlete on the pitch. You don't need to be the musical theater person on the stage. You can be all of it and together, and you can still be just as strong, supportive, friendly, kind, approachable as you could be in any one of those situations. So for each and every one of us out there who has a weird hobby, habit, interest, 80s movies, whatever it may be yourself, be honest about it, be caring, and you'll get to have your own redemption perhaps, or be successful in your own personal Troy Bolton story. Thank you.